signify champions. Now I know a lot of you are with the Cubs, so you're going to see something here that you haven't seen for a long time. However, wow, I love you guys. A 2011 World Series ring. Pretty cool. I got this by association. I work for the organization and I hang out with Fredberg from time to time, so I got a ring. Good deal. I had to work a little bit harder for this. This signifies a champion, a gold medal in the Olympic Games. I happened to be born in the right year, and God blessed me with some talent, so I got to play with some really special people. But what I'm going to tell you now, I don't know how many of you have heard me talk, but I learned to be a champion on the field. And the acronym champion, I think about that. Champions are courageous, they're hardworking, they're accountable, they're mentally tough, they're prepared, they're intentional, they're one-minded, they never give up. Those are attributes of champions. And although I was a champion on the field, whether it was in high school or college or in the big leagues, I wasn't a champion at home with my family or for my faith. And I wanted to kind of share just briefly my journey, my faith journey, because it's probably a little bit different if you haven't heard me talk than you might expect. I have a chance to do a television show with Fredberg. If you're under 18, you probably have no idea that I ever played Major League Baseball, and that's okay. But I do work with Fredberg, and you probably know if you've seen our TV show. I have a cousin, a distant cousin, whose mom is elderly, and he was going to southern Indiana to visit his mom, and they were going to watch my TV show. And I think her eyesight's a little bad, and she's starting to lose her faculties a little bit. And so they're watching the show, and at the beginning of the show, it's like, hey, I'm Andy, this is Fredberg, you're watching Cardinals Kids, and it's me and Fredberg, right? And his mom's looking, and she's like, which one's Andy? Fredberg's in a bird costume, for crying out loud. Really? Well, for a long time in my personal life, I was wearing a costume just like Fredberg does. And I wasn't who I appeared to be. I was a professing Christian because I was a good guy and I went to church and I had been to a few Bible studies. But that's not who I was. That's not what I was all about. I had a really cool baseball card. One of the guys brought it tonight. I saw it. It's a testimony card. And what makes a good testimony card is, you have to have some good stats, right? I mean, baseball is all about stats. And I guess for running backs, how many times you get to the end zone, right? So I had some really good stats. I'm like, man, I was a gold medalist. I was the #1 pick in the draft. I was in the big leagues. And that all happened over like 16 months. But to have a testimony card, you have to have something about Jesus. So I threw Jesus, Jesus was kind of like, oh, and by the way, I love Jesus. So that was a good card, right? The problem was my faith and trust was not in Jesus. Even though that's what I would say. I knew what the Bible said about Jesus, and I could quote scripture, and I grew up in the church. But that's not what was in my heart. What was in my heart was me, and what I could get for me, and what I could do with a little white baseball. That's what was in my heart. And so even though I would profess Jesus as Lord, I was really trusting in myself. And coach, as an athlete, you have to be, whether it's at whatever level, you have to be focused, you have to be somewhat selfish with your time and effort. You got to believe that you're the best. If you have the running back if you're giving the ball to the running back on the 1 yard line, you better hope that guy thinks he can get in the end zone, right? You don't want a guy that's hoping. He's got to say, man, give me the ball. I'm getting it in there. I took all that to a whole nother level because my whole life was about me. And even though my public image, I was a public speaker for the team, the teams that I played for, I went to chapel, I was a good ambassador. I was building a house and nobody knew what was on the inside. Everybody saw the good that was on the outside. And honestly, I didn't trust in God, I trusted in me. In addition to that, I learned at a very young age, I was a people pleaser. I learned, hey, you do good on the football field, baseball, basketball. I'm from Indiana, basketball. But hey, you know what? People love you. They pat you on the back. And so I thrived on that. But I also had an addictive nature. I had, over the course of a long time, my wife and I have actually been married 28 years now. But I had inappropriate relationships. I had gambling issues. I had drinking issues. And all those things created a lot of division in my marriage. It created a lack of trust, and I didn't really have a relationship with my wife or my kids. You know, I was a famous athlete in a baseball mecca whose life was crumbling and nobody knew it, because when we sin, do we jump up and say, hey guys, I'm getting ready to sin, check it out? No, right? We do it in the dark. I was great at manipulating the truth. I was great at deceiving, lying, because I didn't care about anybody except me. And I didn't want to be accountable to God. I knew what God was asking, but I didn't want to be accountable to Him. My wife didn't like me. My kids didn't really know me very well, other than their dad played baseball, but I was really all about me. And in Matthew, the Bible talks about building your house on the rock or on the sand. I'm going to read it. Jesus said this: "Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a mighty crash." See, I knew the difference, Coach, between right and wrong, good and evil, but it was in my head, and that's a big distance from your head to your heart. It's a little further for me than some of you all, but it hadn't transferred to my heart. I talked about accountability. A crash was coming, and my wife finally said, about 10 years ago, she said, "Here's the deal. There's not really much of a relationship here. You don't have a relationship with your kids. Kind of tired of your act. Everybody in St. Louis loves you. Go live with those people for a little bit, because after a very short time, they're going to know what I know, that you're phony and that all you care about is yourself. So go live with them." So, Coach, I did what every 37-year-old ex-athlete would do. I went to stay with my mom and dad. And